The air in Abuja was thick with heat and power. Cameras flashed. World leaders were arriving for the ECOWAS emergency summit. Everyone expected it to be tense, but no one expected this. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of his armored SUV, dressed sharply in his tan military uniform. He greeted a few journalists with quiet nods, then walked confidently toward the glass doors of the ECOWAS building. But when he reached the entrance, something strange happened. 2 guards blocked his path. "No entry, sir. Your name's not on the list," one of them said coldly. Traoré blinked, confused. "That's not possible. I received a formal invitation." Inside, other African leaders watched through the glass, some pretending not to notice. Others stared in silent discomfort. Then came the whisper. A White House leak had just gone viral online. Donald Trump personally told ECOWAS to keep Traoré out. That line spread like fire. Millions watched the video clip of Traoré standing alone, blocked. Some cried, some were furious. But Traoré? He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there and smiled. No one knew what he was planning next. But the world was about to find out. Inside the ECOWAS meeting hall, confusion quietly spread. President Tinubu glanced toward the empty Burkina Faso seat, his jaw tight. Ghana's president shifted nervously. The Senegalese delegate looked down at his tablet, pretending to check notes. No one wanted to address the elephant in the room. But the whispers wouldn't stop. Is it true Trump ordered this? Why single out Traoré? And just outside the building, cameras continued rolling. Ibrahim Traoré didn't move. His hands were behind his back, his face calm, but firm. His media aide approached him quietly. "Sir, the footage has gone viral. Over 10 million views in an hour. They're calling it a disgrace." He nodded. "Let them talk. I didn't come here for a seat. I came for my people." At that moment, a crying Burkina Faso woman watching from her phone in Ouagadougou whispered through tears, "That man, he's standing outside for us." But behind closed doors, something darker was unfolding. A senior ECOWAS official leaned over to Tinubu and whispered, "The Americans want him silenced. He's upsetting too many plans." Tinubu didn't respond. He only tapped his fingers, looking uncomfortable. But one thing was clear. Ibrahim wasn't welcome, and he knew it. After nearly 40 minutes standing outside in the scorching sun, Traoré turned to leave. That's when a high-ranking ECOWAS protocol officer rushed toward him. "Captain Traoré, I've been told to inform you, the meeting is restricted to heads of state only." Traoré blinked slowly. "I am the head of state of Burkina Faso." The man hesitated. "Yes. Well, there are additional clearance protocols." The American representative. Traoré interrupted him softly. "Did Donald Trump block me?" Silence. The man looked down. That's all Traoré needed to know. Behind him, reporters were screaming questions. Protesters were already gathering. One shouted, "Traoré speaks truth. That's why they fear him." Inside the meeting, an aide handed President Tinubu a red folder marked "Confidential." It read, "Traoré's rising popularity poses strategic risks to U.S.-Africa policy. Recommend diplomatic isolation." Meanwhile, across the continent, African youth flooded social media. "Let him in" was trending in 27 countries. And in that moment, Traoré said something so soft, but it echoed across every screen. "When your truth threatens their power, they'll shut the door. But I'll build another entrance." The world held its breath, because no one had seen him angry yet. But they were about to. A quiet storm was building. Inside the ECOWAS building, a young intern nervously rushed to the main conference room and whispered something into the ear of the Ivorian foreign minister. He turned sharply. "What do you mean Traoré's still outside?" the intern stammered. "He's waiting. He didn't leave." Heads turned. Tinubu sighed, wiping his brow. Tell him to wait. We'll address it later. But outside, Traoré didn't flinch. He stood still, sweat running down his face. His guards asked if he wanted to leave. He shook his head. I don't walk away from my people's dignity. Inside, a screen blinked with incoming data. Leaked emails from a U.S. diplomatic advisor to ECOWAS. Traoré's ideology is a threat to regional control. His presence may influence others, delay his access. A Nigerian journalist covering the summit saw the message. She gasped. She clicked publish. Within minutes, millions had seen it. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was betrayal. And in the streets of Ouagadougou, children were seen holding handmade signs. Let our leader in. But still, no door opened. And Traoré didn't move. Because some fights are silent and deadly. As the sun grew hotter, Ibrahim Traoré's shadow lengthened across the pavement. No shade, no seat, no apology. And yet, he stayed. Then, something beautiful happened. An old woman, barefoot, wrapped in bright kente cloth, walked out from the crowd. She was not security, not media, just a citizen. She walked right past the guards and stood beside him, wordless. Then she opened a small, tattered umbrella and held it over his head. Traoré turned, surprised. You don't have to. She cut him off softly. You've protected us long enough. Today, let me protect you. Tears filled the eyes of onlookers. A soldier, a grandmother, standing together in silence. Cameras captured it all. That image spread faster than any speech. It was printed on shirts, painted on murals, and shared by children online. Honor is not invited. It stands on its own. Inside, the ECOWAS delegates were handed printed copies of the photo. A Senegalese general clenched his fist. This is shameful. But still, no one moved to fix it. Traoré? He smiled softly at the old woman and whispered, You've just done more than any president inside. Back inside, ECOWAS leaders began their session. But before the first speech, the Nigerian defense minister's phone buzzed. It was a direct line, Washington, D.C. He stepped out, answered, and listened. Then he came back pale-faced. They say if Traoré is let in, U.S. funding may be reviewed. Gasps filled the room. Fear crept in like a cold wind. But Ghana's president stood up. Are we that weak? We ban one of our own because of foreign fear? No one answered. Outside, a CNN reporter asked Traoré if he'd like to issue a statement. He nodded once, looked straight into the lens, and calmly said, If my presence threatens their comfort, imagine what our independence would do. The clip went viral instantly. It was translated into 14 languages in under an hour. A youth activist in Togo began a live protest. A university in Mali suspended classes and students flooded the streets chanting, Traoré speaks for us all. Inside ECOWAS, silence. Then the Ghanaian president stood up again. I'll walk out, if he doesn't walk in. The room held its breath. The first crack had formed, and the walls of silence were starting to shake. A storm was now inside the room. The Ghanaian president's words had struck a nerve. I'll walk out if he doesn't walk in. But Nigeria's top diplomat responded with a whisper only a few heard. We can't let him in, not after Trump's message. The room turned quiet. Everyone knew what that meant. Some delegates nervously checked their phones. The U.S. Embassy had just posted a vague statement. Burkina Faso's internal leadership decisions raise regional concerns. But no one believed that was the real reason. Outside, Traoré was still standing, still waiting. The old woman had collapsed from heat, and Traoré had lifted her gently, placed her in his SUV with water, and asked his guard to get her home safely. Not one camera missed that. He protects strangers while leaders hide behind air conditioning, someone tweeted. The image went viral. And inside the room, leaders began whispering, "He's winning hearts while we lose ours." Still, no one opened the door. Because fear speaks louder than courage in rooms where power is rented. But something was about to shift, and not even Trump could stop it. That evening, as ECOWAS talks dragged on behind closed doors, something unexpected happened. A little girl appeared outside the building. She held a small cardboard sign in shaky handwriting. "My papa works in there. He says they don't like Traoré, but I like him." The media zoomed in instantly. Ibrahim Traoré knelt to her level. "What's your name?" he asked. "Amira," she whispered. "You look like my uncle. He went to heaven last year." Traoré smiled gently. "Then I must be your uncle too." She looked up. "Are you sad because they won't let you in?" He paused, then nodded. "A little." She reached into her school bag and handed him a red crayon. "You can draw your own meeting. That's what I do when they don't pick me in class." He laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was healing. The cameras caught the moment. The clip of Amira handing Traoré the crayon was seen in over 100 countries by morning. Inside, Amira's father, a senior ECOWAS delegate, watched the video in silence. Tears filled his eyes. That night, he walked out of the meeting quietly and whispered into a mic, "We've lost our way. He's already leading more than any of us." The next morning, the ECOWAS hall looked tense. Fatigue showed on every face. Media pressure was growing. Protesters surrounded the building. Celebrities and former presidents were tweeting support for Traoré. Still, the seat marked Burkina Faso sat empty, as if it were cursed. Traoré remained outside, calm, composed, but firm. Inside, Ghana's president stood again. "This empty chair shames us all," he said. "We say we're united, but we're acting like servants to foreign whispers." The words echoed. President Tinubu didn't respond, but others shifted. One by one, representatives from Mali, Guinea, and Sierra Leone stood. "If he's not allowed in," said the Guinean envoy, "we will no longer speak." And they didn't. They folded their papers and left. 3 chairs now stood empty. Then, the lights flickered. A message was being patched into the private ECOWAS feed. Someone had leaked a secret phone call. Trump's voice. "That guy's a problem. Lock him out. Don't let him grandstand. Africa needs discipline." Gasps filled the room. Tinubu's hands trembled. Outside, Traoré remained silent, because he didn't need to say anything. The world was speaking for him now. The secret audio had leaked. Trump's voice, loud and undeniable. "That guy's a problem. Lock him out. Africa needs discipline." Inside the ECOWAS room, no one breathed for a full 10 seconds. Then came the murmurs. He actually said it. A delegate from Sierra Leone slammed his notepad shut. "Are we puppets or leaders?" Outside, Traoré hadn't moved. He stood facing the glass. His reflection stared back at him, unshaken. Social media was in chaos. CNN. Trump accused of blocking African leader from ECOWAS summit. Al Jazeera. Leaked tape suggests foreign interference in African unity. Even American voices were starting to speak. A former U.S. ambassador tweeted, "This isn't diplomacy, it's disgrace." In a cafe in Nairobi, a woman wept while watching Traoré on her phone. She whispered, "He's carrying all of us on his shoulders." Inside, ECOWAS leaders looked at one another. Shame hung heavy in the room. But still, no one had the courage to open the door, until one man stood up from the far end. He adjusted his tie and said, "Then let's see if Africa still belongs to Africans." It was the man no one expected, and what he did next would shake the whole continent. The man was Dr. Sylvester Fofana, the quiet delegate from Guinea-Bissau. He was never one to speak loudly, never one to challenge power. But something in his eyes had changed. He walked past his colleagues, past the security guards, past the whispers, and he opened the door. For the first time in hours, the ECOWAS building doors opened wide. Outside, Traoré didn't flinch. Dr. Fofana stood before him, and with tears in his eyes, he said, "Captain, please, come in. Forgive our weakness." Traoré looked at him, long and deep. He stepped forward slowly, not proud, not angry, just quiet strength. The cameras went crazy. The crowd outside erupted in cheers. Traoré's Africa began trending worldwide. Inside the ECOWAS hall, leaders stood up one by one. Even President Tinubu, after a long pause, stood. Traoré walked in. But before sitting, he said one line, "This seat does not belong to me. It belongs to every African child who believes their voice matters." The room went completely still. Then, a slow, reluctant applause, some sincere, some ashamed. But one thing had changed. He was inside, and his silence had said more than any speech ever could. Outside the building, most of the protesters had stayed. They wanted to see if the news was real. When they saw Traoré walk through the doors on the giant screen, people started crying in the street. But the most powerful tears came from a different place. One of the guards, the same one who blocked Traoré hours earlier, leaned quietly against the wall and wiped his face. A journalist approached. "Why are you crying?" He hesitated, then whispered, "My father was killed in a war when I was young. No one helped my mother. No one saw our pain. But this man, he stood for us, and I followed orders, and shut him out." He broke down. That moment was caught on camera. By nightfall, it had over 30 million views. The caption? "Even the strong cry when they see true strength." Inside the ECOWAS hall, Traoré sat, calm, composed, and waited for his turn to speak. But before he could, the power in the building cut out. Darkness. Then, a voice rang out through the emergency speakers. It wasn't ECOWAS. It was someone else, and they weren't happy he got in. The room went black. Microphones died. Screens shut off. Even the translator headsets cut out. Then, from the corner speaker system, a voice began to echo. At first it was muffled, then clearer. It wasn't African. It wasn't ECOWAS. It was American. "He shouldn't be in that room. You were warned. Leadership must be controlled." Delegates looked around in horror. Who had access to the building's internal feed? The message continued. "This is not the time for disobedience. Remember your agreements. Remember who funds your armies." Outside, protesters heard the sound leak through speakers mounted on the side walls. Journalists froze. Even the global media feed picked it up. For 2 minutes it played. Threats, orders, veiled insults. Then, silence. Lights flickered back on. Everyone was pale. Everyone but one man. Ibrahim Traoré slowly stood. He looked around the hall, eyes filled with a calm sadness, and said one line, "If the price of being free is your comfort, I'm ready to pay it." The room was still. A woman, ECOWAS advisor, silently wept. That day, a truth came out that no one could unhear, and Traoré hadn't raised his voice once. The microphones had been reconnected. But Traoré didn't wait for permission. He stepped to the podium and looked around the room. Leaders, guards, aides, cameras. Then he began to speak. His voice was soft, firm, measured. "Today I stood outside the door of my own continent. Not because I was late, not because I disrespected anyone, but because I refused to kneel." Gasps, shuffling. "You say this is a union, a family. But what kind of family closes the door when one brother refuses to be silent?" His words were not angry. They were heartbreaking. He spoke of the young men dying in forests, of mothers who sold food by candlelight, of children who learn under trees because schools had been looted for copper. "I am not your enemy," he said. "I am your reminder that our dignity cannot be imported." Some delegates looked down in shame. One man walked out, shaking. Another whispered, "I wish I had his courage." Traoré ended with this: "If today I am a threat, then tomorrow I'll be a lesson." The applause came slow, but it grew. And outside, millions stood up. Even the sky seemed to pause. As Traoré stepped away from the podium, a young ECOWAS staff member approached him quietly. "Sir, someone left this envelope at reception. It's addressed to you." Inside were 3 letters, handwritten in soft ink. One was from a 10-year-old boy in Burkina Faso, who wrote, "Dear Captain, I heard they didn't let you inside, but you are already inside our hearts." The second was from a woman in Sierra Leone who had never voted in her life. "They call you loud, but your silence taught me more than their speeches." And the third was from a widow in Mali whose husband had died in a mining accident. She wrote, "They closed the door, but you stood for the ones they buried, for the ones who have no seat, no voice, no name." Traoré closed the letters slowly. For a moment he looked tired, not defeated, not angry, just human. Outside, as the sun began to set, the ECOWAS building was surrounded by candles. Children lit them one by one, not for protest, but in honor. Because when leadership feels like love, people remember it forever. While the world was still reacting to Traoré's speech, something was happening behind closed doors. 3 presidents, from Nigeria, Ghana, and Côte d'Ivoire, met in a private back room. Tinubu looked shaken. "If Washington pulls aid, it'll hurt." Ghana's president looked him dead in the eye. "But if we silence Traoré, we lose something worse. Our soul." There was silence. Then came a knock. A messenger entered, holding a printed message from the African Union. One line stood out: "The world is watching. Your silence will echo louder than your decisions." Meanwhile, Traoré had quietly stepped away from the cameras. He found a quiet hallway and sat, alone, with the 3 letters he'd been given earlier. One aide asked softly, "Are you okay, Captain?" He nodded. "I'm just thinking." "About what?" Traoré looked up. "About how history repeats itself, but this time, we write the ending." That night, social media exploded again. A leaked vote showed ECOWAS had split. Half wanted to suspend Burkina Faso. Half wanted to let Traoré speak freely and move forward united. A decision had to be made, and no one saw the next part coming. The next morning, the world waited. TV anchors across the globe reported a final vote inside ECOWAS could shift the future of Africa. Then, the doors of the ECOWAS hall opened. Traoré entered, not in his uniform but in traditional Burkina robes. Simple, humble. He walked to the front. But before he could speak, President Tinubu stood. "Captain," he said, voice trembling, "before you say anything, we need to say something to you." The room went silent. One by one, the delegates stood and removed the nameplate that read, "Burkina Faso vacant." They handed it to Traoré. Ghana's leader stepped forward. "This seat is yours, and no one, not from outside this continent or within, will take it again." A long pause. Traoré held the nameplate in both hands. He didn't smile. He looked at each of them, then gently placed it back on the table. "I never asked for power," he said softly. "I asked for fairness. I asked for respect. And I asked that we never again allow others to tell us who belongs at our own table." The applause wasn't loud. It was slow. But every clap sounded like Africa reclaiming its voice. After the summit ended, reporters rushed toward Traoré. "Captain, will you respond to Trump's comments?" Do you feel justice was done? Traoré stopped, turned. He looked straight into the camera and gave the quote that would shake the world. I am not here to fight America. I'm here to fight the silence. If one leader is locked out today, 10 million children will be locked out tomorrow. Africa doesn't need to be rescued. It needs to be respected. That clip hit 100 million views in 36 hours. African youth began posting videos of themselves saying the line, "We don't need rescue. We need respect." In Burkina Faso, people wept in the streets. One woman held a candle and whispered, "He didn't just speak for us. He stood for us." Traoré returned home with no entourage, no celebration. But when he stepped out of the plane, thousands were waiting, holding crayons, umbrellas, and letters. He broke down in tears, not for himself, but because he knew something had changed. And from that moment forward, Africa stood taller. If this story moved you, if it made you cry, if it reminded you that Africa still has voices worth listening to, please like this video. Drop a comment, even if it's just a flag, a heart, or the word respect. And don't forget to subscribe. Because on this channel, we don't just report stories. We tell the ones they try to silence. Long live truth. Long live Africa. Long live dignity.